Today we're going to look at the short story called The Scarlet Ibis by James Hurst. James Hurst was born in 1922 in North Carolina, and he moved to New York City to study singing at Juilliard. Later he moved to Rome, Italy, and continued his singing. Later he returned to New York City and he became a banker, living there for 34 years and then also writing short stories on the side. So we're going to look at this passage from The Scarlet Ibis. Was just about the craziest brother a boy ever had. Of course he wasn't a crazy like old Miss Leedy, who was in love with President Wilson and wrote him a letter every day, but was a nice crazy like someone you meet in your dreams. He was born when I was 6 and was from the outset a disappointment. He seemed all head with a tiny body which was red and shriveled like an old man's. Everybody thought he was going to die, everybody except Aunt Nicey, who had delivered him. She said he would live because he was born in a caul, and cauls were made from Jesus' nightgown. Daddy had Mr. Heath the carpenter build a little mahogany coffin for him, but he didn't die, and when he was 3 months old, Mama and Daddy decided that they might as well name him. They named him William Armstrong, which was like tying a big tail on a small kite. Such a name sounds good only on a tombstone. I thought myself pretty smart at many things, like holding my breath, running, jumping, or climbing the vines in Old Woman Swamp. And I wanted more than anything else someone to race to Horsehead Landing, someone to box with, and someone to perch with in the top of the fork of the great pine behind the barn, where across the fields and swamps you could see the sea. I wanted a brother, but Mama, crying, told me that even if William Armstrong lived, he would never do these things with me. He might not, she sobbed, even be all there. He might, as long as he lived, live on the rubber sheet in the center of the bed in the front bedroom where the white marquisette curtains billowed out in the afternoon sea breeze, rustling like palmetto fronds. It was bad enough having an invalid brother, but having one who possibly was not all there was unbearable. So I began to make plans to kill him by smothering him with a pillow. However, one afternoon as I watched him, my head poked between the iron post of the foot of the bed, and he looked straight at me and grinned. I skipped through the rooms, down echoing halls, shouting, "Mama!" He smiled. "He's all there. He's all there." Although and Doodle learned to crawl, he showed no signs of walking, but he wasn't idle. He talked so much that we all quit listening to him, and it was about this time that Daddy built him a go-kart, and I had to pull him around. At first, I just paraded him up and down the piazza, but then he started crying to be taken out into the yard, and it ended up by my having to lug him wherever I went. If I so much as picked up my cap, he'd start crying to go with me, and Mama would call from wherever she was, "Take Doodle with you." And he was a burden in many ways. The doctor had said that he mustn't get too excited and too hot, too cold, or too tired, and that he must always be treated gently. A long list of don'ts went with him, all which I ignored once we got out of the house. To discourage his coming with me, I'd run with him across the ends of the cotton rows and careen him around corners on 2 wheels. Sometimes I accidentally turned him over, but he never told Mama. His skin was very sensitive, and he had to wear a big straw hat whenever he went out. When the going got rough and he had to cling to the sides of the go-kart, the hat slipped all the way down over his ears, and he was a sight. Finally, I could see that I was licked. Doodle was my brother, and he was going to cling to me forever. Okay, so let's look at the literary analysis of this story. The setting of this particular story, The Scarlet Ibis, is set in the South, perhaps North Carolina, during World War I, because there was a reference to President Wilson. The plot of the story, this basic situation, is that there's the struggle between these 2 brothers. The elder brother tries to teach his younger disabled brother to walk and other physical activities, but ends up pushing him too hard because his pride gets in his way. The climax of this story occurs when the narrator runs away from his brother in a rainstorm, and the younger brother tries to keep up with him, but he just can't, and he falls to the ground. The resolution, or the final outcome of the story, is that the little brother, Doodle, dies of heart failure in the end, and his brother, feeling guilty for leaving him behind, runs back to check on him and discovers it's too late. The narrator begins to weep and places his body over the body of his fallen ibis, sheltering him from the heresy of rain. So the point of view of this story is told in first person. And it's told retrospectively because the narrator is much older now, and it seems that he's gone back to visit his old childhood stomping ground. And he is, of course, the eldest brother, and he feels ashamed of his younger brother because he was born crippled. And he is looking back on this experience perhaps regretfully, and the story is told as a confessional. The protagonist, of course, in the story is the elder brother. and he is unnamed. The ages of this older brother would be from the age of 6 when the story begins to the age of 13 at the very end of the story. The antagonist of the story, of course, is Doodle, the little boy, William Armstrong, who was born with a disability and who created a burden for his older brother. He's depicted from the age of infancy to the age of 7 when he passes away. Now, the symbolism in this story is that we see this very rare bird, the scarlet ibis. It shows up one day in the bleeding tree in the backyard of the family's home. Now, this bird is normally a bird that lives in South America in a much milder climate, and so for it to end up in North Carolina would be very rare. And so it's traveled a great distance and it's exhausted. And so by the time the family gets out to examine the bird takes its last breath and it falls from the ground, or falls from the tree and dies right there in front of them. And so little Doodle picks up the bird. And he, well, actually, he doesn't pick it up. His mother cautions him not to pick it up, so he ties a string around it, and he takes it very gently to the family's flower garden, and he buries it there. And so the scarlet ibis, this bird, is a very rare occurrence, and it seems like it's kind of an omen. It's foreshadowing the death of Doodle, because Doodle himself is a very rare child that was born in a caul. A caul is a membrane that's born, around some infants when they're born. And so Aunt Nicey, of course, in the story, believed that you should show a child who was born in a caul great respect because he or she could turn out to be a saint. And so the theme of this story is that it focuses on the idea of the eldest brother's pride. He states, "It seems hopeless from the beginning, that it's a miracle that I didn't give up." And of course he was referring to teaching Doodle to walk. He continues, "But all of us have something or someone to be proud of, and Doodle has become mine. I did not know then that pride is a wonderful, terrible thing, a seed that bears 2 vines, life and death." And so in discussing this story, James Hurst himself talks about the fact that the war was raging. World War I was raging in Europe, and so he discusses this story in terms of 2 brothers, as if Europe were 2 brothers, related brothers in conflict. And he relates it back to Doodle and his elder brother. And he states this. He says, "People always suffer when others try to make them over in their own image." And that's exactly what was happening in the story, that this elder brother was trying to make Doodle over because he felt embarrassed and ashamed. And so he discovered from this that by teaching him to walk, even though his family was ecstatic when they revealed that this little boy could walk, the elder brother recognized that it was out of his pride and out of his embarrassment that he drove his brother to these ends. So the imagery in the story is just wonderful. There are so many places for description in the story. It's hard to pick out a favorite one, but there are lots of places where there's description of Old Woman Swamp. There's a description of course, Doodle himself and the go-kart, the passage that I just read, where he's wearing the straw cap down over his ears. There's also a very dark scene where the older brother, in his cruelty, takes him upstairs to the loft in the barn and dares him to touch the mahogany coffin. And of course the boy doesn't want to touch it. He says, "No, it's not mine." And the brother says, "Yes, that is your coffin." And so he says, "Touch it." And so of course he says, "I'll leave you up here if you don't touch the coffin." And so he goes out to touch the coffin, and right at that moment he screams because this screech owl comes flying out of the coffin because it had created a nest inside there. And so that's a really important image in the story, and of course the foreshadowing of Doodle's death later on. And so in the story then, the tone is humorous at times when we see him careening around corners in the go-kart and some of the other antics that the boys have throughout their summers. And yet there's an ironic tone as well, because we see these foreshadowings and these omens that something ominous or foreboding is about to happen. It's a mournful tone at times. It's very sad in the end, poignant and heartbreaking to see that this little boy dies of heart failure when his brother pushes him too hard to swim and to run later on in the story. Shame. So this is an important story that has been anthologized many times over in high school literature books, and it's one that I would certainly recommend. So thank you for watching.